everybody. It's Jay, Stongo, Leslie Ijo, Cho Jifka. My name is Leslie Deer. How are you? I'm a citizen of the Muscogee Nation of Oklahoma, and I am an apparel designer. I'm here to talk about Native fashion today, although I am by no means any expert on Native fashion, so I'm just going to share a little bit of my perspective or maybe my process. And hopefully we'll have a good time here. Native fashion is enjoying quite the moment right now, isn't it? It's finally getting the recognition that it so rightfully deserves. And it's just a very exciting time for fashion and for Indigenous designers to see all of the work out there and see all the new and up and coming designers. And I just think that it's so exciting. And fashion in general is kind of, it's one of those subjective things. What is fashion? What isn't fashion? I think everything is fashion, really. But fashion obviously makes a statement. It communicates a lot of information. It tells a lot about the individual wearing the fashion, the person creating the fashion. It tells a story, more or less. And I like to think of that when I'm creating my own artwork. I think of the message that it conveys, what it communicates. And so that's what I think about when I'm working on my own fashion. But also, I think that fashion is something that is always looking for the next, the new. Show us something that we haven't seen before. I think that's what fashion is really all about. And sometimes it's kind of challenging for me personally, because I happen to like classic silhouettes, things that you could wear today or things that you could wear 10 years from now. And they're not going to be like, that's so 10 years ago or something. It's something that still works and still looks nice. I use a lot of classic silhouettes, but I'm always looking for new ways to implement my artwork and showcase my tribal knowledge and cultural identity in what I do. So a lot of what I do incorporates our Southeast designs, Southeast from the mound builder culture, which is the ancestors to all of the tribes from down in the Southeast. So if you can't tell, I like sun circle designs. You don't see them everywhere in my work, but I like to incorporate those. And I really feel like our artwork from thousands of years ago is so beautiful. And for a long time, nobody knew what it was. So many people had never seen it before. We're all familiar with like maybe plain style beadwork or Southwest artwork, geometric designs, all of those different things. But a lot of people until recently had not seen our Southeast artwork. So I just thought that it was something that needed to be shared with the world and be shown. I felt like that was part of my ancestors, and I didn't want to leave them in history from thousands of years ago. I felt like as a Muscogee citizen, it was partly my responsibility to bring them forward with me and bring them into the present day. So that's why I like to use these designs in my work. And I'm still always learning about these designs myself. I certainly don't know everything, but I only use designs that I'm comfortable using, that I feel like I understand what they convey, what they represent, and what they mean. So I use a limited amount of the Southeast designs in what I do, but I am always looking for new ways to use them. So I brought a couple examples of my work with me today, just to share with you. And one is more of I guess I would say more a classic look for an ensemble, a garment, a skirt and a top. And then something that is a little bit more modern. Like I said, I was always looking for new ideas and the next things. So this was a new technique that I learned on this side. And this is something that's more traditional with classic, pattern drafting, draping, and then applying my artwork to it. So they both are really appealing to me. Some people might not like one or both or either one of them, but I like them both. And this is something new that I'm doing on this side. This is a zero waste technique called subtraction cutting. And I like to experiment with new things as well. So these are a couple of my designs. But as far as Native fashion in general goes, I mean, you can see artwork and apparel from just so many different tribes out there. And sometimes you can look at them, and just by the artwork, you can identify what tribe that comes from or what region of the country that comes from, what kind of tribe the designer might belong to. And so I think that that's really fascinating. And even in present day, to be able to do that and identify a region or a tribe that artwork comes from is really interesting, I think, to me. I remember a long time ago when I was young and I used to dance. I grew up in an urban area around San Francisco, but when I would dance, all of the dancers had different regalia, and you could look at their regalia and know what tribe they were from or what part of the country. Maybe it's not so much that way nowadays, but back then it was. And again, all of what they were wearing was fashion, and it did tell a story. It communicated a lot of information about them. And I think as Indigenous people, we are always adapting, we're always incorporating, we're always modifying things. And so as new things come available to us, we're always taking those and saying, how can we use this? What can we do with this? What's different about this? What can we do to make this new? And I actually was just talking to someone a little while ago, and she was telling me she had a pair of pants that had pearl buttons down the side. And she said, of course, I took the pearl buttons off and I made toys for my granddaughter with those buttons. So, we're always looking at new ways to use things. We just don't take it at face value and say, okay, what can I, here it is, this is what it is. We're always looking at ways to change it and make it new and make it different. How can we break this up and make it into several different things? What can we do with it? So I think that all of that is a part of Native fashion that all contributes to what we see today in the mainstream. And it's so wonderful to see all of the not just the designs, but the models as well. Some of you might be familiar with some of the models that are out there now that are getting a lot of visibility, not just in social media, but in the major, design fashion shows in Paris and all over the world, So I think that that's something that's really, really awesome to see as an Indigenous person. It's so wonderful to see those models out there and those designers getting that recognition too. I saw recently that there was a designer who had her work up on a billboard in Times Square. And so that was really wonderful to see. Finally, we're getting the recognition alongside other big name designers that is definitely warranted. We definitely need to be out there and get more visibility. But I think that what that does for us, getting that visibility for us, kind of, reminds people on one hand, it reminds people, that Indigenous people are still here. We're still thriving. We're still surviving, no matter what you have tried to do to us, what you've tried to take away from us. We're still here and we're still adapting. We're still modifying. We are still here and we are just thriving today. So I really am excited for Native fashion and the things that it conveys, the things that it represents, and how it puts visibility out there for us as Native people. I actually grew up drawing clothes and sketching things for myself is how I kind of got interested in fashion, not really realizing that I would be designing clothes or doing something one day. I just used to sketch things for myself and ask my mom to make them. I had a home ec class where I had to use a sewing machine. And I guess I had trouble threading the machines because I used to tell my instructors that once I was done with that class, I was never gonna touch another sewing machine. So this is what I get for saying that probably. But I would ask my mom to sew clothes for me and I would always sketch things and she would try her best to buy commercial patterns and piece them together and make whatever I wanted. And at one point when I was traveling and dancing a lot, as a cast member of a dance company, I realized that I needed to make more regalia. I didn't have nearly enough clothes with me to do 8 shows a week. So I had to start trying to use those sewing skills and make some of my own things. And from there, it just kind of evolved from making my own dance regalia into people saying, can you make something for me? Can you make something for this? Can you make something for that? And I wasn't comfortable making things to fit all different sizes. I didn't know how to do that. And I felt like I needed to go back to school and learn how to do pattern drafting and draping. So I finally decided to go to school and pursue a degree in apparel design. I already had a bachelor's degree, so I said, can I just take pattern drafting and draping and be done? And they're like, no, you have to start at the beginning at intermediate sewing and take everything. So I did, and I thought that once I got as far as the pattern drafting and draping classes, I would learn what I wanted to learn and then I would just quit school. But by the time I got there, I was in my junior year and I just needed 18 more hours to get a degree. So I went ahead and got the degree. So here I am, I was like, well, now I have a degree, so I guess I better really pursue this. So just by chance, just by going with the flow of things and just following that path, I guess you would call me an apparel designer now, but I really just look at what I do as like having fun and experimenting and just playing with colors that I like and that sort of thing. I know that that's not every designer's perspective. Some have a clear message that they're trying to convey or certain things that they want to accomplish with their design. But for me, I just enjoy doing what I do. And I always feel like if I like it, maybe someone else will like it. You know, I'm not trying to mass produce anything. I just want to create what I like to create and hopefully someone else will like it too. So there are so many different avenues to pursue in fashion these days in terms of printing on our own fabric, again, using technology, incorporating whatever we have at our disposal, printing our own fabric or manipulating the fabric through pattern pattern drafting. It's really just kind of exploded in all the different avenues we can pursue. I remember when I was young and I enjoyed sketching clothing, but I could never imagine how I could become a fashion designer. I thought, well, those are people that work in big giant factories, and how do you ever get to be there when you live in Oklahoma or grow up in Oakland, California? So it was just kind of something that was beyond my own means to even imagine until I became older and realized it was something that I could do. So there were definitely other designers and women elders that came before me that helped me out along the way. And I think that that's probably how it is for most fashion designers. They have someone that teaches them basic skills or plants that seed in that person to help them flourish and help them grow as far as becoming a designer and being interested in fashion and making a statement with the clothing. So for me, it was elders in my community. I learned the technique of applique, which is something that I learned from Sac and Fox women. I grew up around Shawnee once I got out of high school, and it was Sac and Fox elders in my community that showed me how to do the applique technique, and they shared some of their traditional patterns with me. They told me that they wanted me to make sure that applique and the technique of applique did not die out. They said, "You're the one who's here at our class. Anybody could have come. Our tribal members didn't even come, but you're here. And so you're gonna learn, and we want you to carry it forward." They gave me a lot of their own designs, these women, and they told me to keep it going. So I did do a lot of ribbon work, applique, for a long, long time. I used that on my own dance regalia. And as time went on, I decided to just take that technique and apply it to our own Southeast motifs again. One of my favorite things. In this dress, I don't know from the front, I think it looks a little plain, but I don't know if I can turn this around without knocking it over, but it has more artwork on the back side. Let me see if I can turn it around really quick. So this is just an example of how I took the technique of applique that they taught me, and then I turned it into something that applies to my own Southeast tribal nation. This is an outfit that I made during lockdown, and it was literally the beginning when we couldn't go to work, we couldn't go outside, we couldn't drive down the road. You had to have like a letter stating that you had a purpose to be out on the road in the beginning. And so I stayed home and I was like, well, I have to do something. So I decided to start sewing. And this was a dress that I made. And sometimes it still feels weird to me to give my clothes names when you enter them in competitions at art markets. And so my clothes have names, but it kind of still feels weird to me sometimes. But this, this dress is called Resilient Blue, just because I felt like it was a time where we needed to just tell ourselves that we were resilient, and we have come through so much as Indigenous people that the pandemic was something that we would also survive. And so I incorporated a lot of Southeast designs. The design on the sleeve is known as maybe a wind design. Sometimes I call it creator's breath as well, because the creator breathes life into everything. I have a friend who calls these puffs. Every one of these, I call them little puffs. So then it also has the sun circle designs. And I just felt like I put these designs on here in a way kind of just to remind myself of where I come from, what it took for me to get here in the present day. And the creator had a hand in everything. And no matter what happens in our universe, in the world, it's just always important to be reminded that our traditional knowledge, our traditional culture has survived this long, and it's something that will get us through to the next step. It's what keeps us resilient. So that was kind of the idea behind this outfit, and that's why it's called Resilient Blue. I'll turn it back around. This is a very precarious dress form. It's got to be balanced just so or it falls. And it also had a little mask with it because, again, it was the pandemic. So that was a little bit about that dress. And then this is something more modern that I have tried. It's a new technique called subtraction cutting. And it's zero waste. It's actually where you take two long pieces of several yards of fabric and you sew up three sides so it almost looks like a sleeping bag. And then you cut small holes and join the two holes together, which might take a long piece of fabric from the bottom and attach it up here at the top. And that's kind of what happened with this area. This was maybe farther down here. I cut a hole in it, sewed it up to a hole up here, and it gathered that up and pulled some of this volume up. Even when you cut holes, you end up using them in the end. You reattach them in ways like these so that there's no waste in this dress. It's all applied back to the dress. And it's just something fun that I wanted to try, and I really enjoyed doing that. I screen printed my own leather. It's really very lightweight garment leather. Someone described it to me like glove leather, maybe it's really thin. But it's just fine garment leather, and I purchased some remnants or scraps of leather, and I actually just kind of patchworked them all together and then screen printed it. And I had the idea in the beginning to use a more elegant fabric with the leather. I wanted to contrast it with something fancy, but yet not quite as heavy. So I was going to use organza, but that didn't quite work out. Organza really doesn't support the weight of the leather, so I decided that was not a good idea. And at the last minute, I had to run out and find something that had some structure to it, like woven cotton. So that's what I ended up using for this dress, and I was really excited about it. I like it. I know some people look at it and go, what is that? But I think that it's really, really interesting. You can wear it every time you put it on. It's different because you can pull things through from one side to another and then just change it up completely, because it has all these tunnels and pockets and loops and things through it. So it's different every time you wear it. And beyond that, when you make one of these, each dress is different from the next. You really can't duplicate this and make the same exact dress twice. So that's something else that, to me, again, I like the sun circle motif and everything that it represents, you know, from the ceremonial fire in the center. Sometimes we say that's the 4 directions or cardinal directions as well, to the sun itself. It just has so much significance to me, representing our community and our environment and our world, that I really, really enjoy using that symbol. And so that's why I incorporated that into this. I had a screen made to do some screen printing on there. I really enjoyed that process as well. This is something that I worked on over time. I did a little bit of work on it and I would put it up, and then when I had time, I'd pull it out and do some more work on it, until finally I felt like I was happy with it, and then I put a lining in it and called it done. But I like this dress as well. So this is part of my process, and I'm always looking again for new ways to do things, something that I can incorporate that's different, but yet it's new and different, but it's still got those ancient designs, the ancient motifs in it, the artwork from a long, long, long time ago. So I feel like that's something that, to me, it grounds me. It reminds me of who I am and where I come from, and all of my ancestors and everything that it took for me to be here today. All the survival, all of the trials and tribulations. And I think that is part of the story that's told in all of our Indigenous fashion. I feel like that's a really interesting thing, is to have all of that storytelling in all of our garments. Whereas if you just go out and, you know, look at clothes on the rack in the department store, they might be a pretty color, they might be a flattering silhouette, but beyond that, what do they really tell you? They don't really communicate a whole lot of information. And I think that our native fashion is just so rich in all of that, with all of our different motifs and our different storytelling just through the garments themselves, what they say about each other, the garments and the life that they have. I also like to try and create garments that will last a lifetime. I think of how long they're going to last and how far they're going to go forward. So I think of them as something that conveys a message to start with, but at the same time, the wearer, you know, gathers stories at the same time with their garments. And I like to think that those are garments that maybe they would wear at special occasions or for certain events. And then as those garments go forward, they're handed down. And so those stories go with it, and it helps to keep those stories alive of those events. Those special occasions are marked by being a part of that garment and going forward with that garment. So I do try and create things that last. I put a lot of thought into what I do, and as I'm working, I think about that. When I'm sewing, when I'm putting seams together, all of that, I always think about, how can I make this last a long time? What kind of materials can I use? What kind of things that can I do to help preserve this garment so that it goes forward, so that it's not wasted, so that it doesn't fall apart like fashion that you would see in a department store, that it will go forward and last a long time and tell a lot of stories, have a life of its own, more or less. So I think that's something that's important. It's an important part of fashion. I think that when people have garments that they feel like tell a story or communicate information, those are garments that are more treasured, that are more loved, enjoy a longer life, and stay out of landfills and stay out of those kind of things. So definitely it's important to have that identity in your clothing. These are just kind of some of my thoughts about Native fashion, you know, and like I said, I'm not the expert on fashion, but I'm just sharing sort of my perspective. Yes, you have a question?
Can you say more about the dress you're wearing?
The dress I'm wearing, yes, sure. And it's so funny. This dress, you know, I make lots of clothes. I do a lot of custom orders, and sometimes I feel like I don't have anything to offer the public because I'm so tied up doing custom orders for people. And I was going to an event where I know that there would be several other people wearing my garments. And so I didn't want to show up wearing something that somebody else might be wearing, because people don't like to show up and go, oh great, she's wearing the same thing as me. So I wanted to make sure that I didn't show up with something someone else had, and I decided to just make something for myself at the last minute. And I actually went through my scraps to find something that I had enough fabric of that I could put together. So I whipped up this dress. It's really a quick dress. I made it in like an afternoon, but it's made of all scraps. And I just wanted something that I could wear that was comfortable, that I knew I could get done in a short amount of time. I didn't want to spend a long time doing a lot of work to it. So I put it together really quickly and I wore it to the event. As soon as I got there, one of my friends said, I want that dress. And so from there, people have commented and said, I love that dress. It looks so comfortable. I hear that a lot. It looks so comfortable. So I just hear it every time I wear it. It's almost my uniform now. I'm like, I wear this everywhere I go because it is comfortable. I hear that so much that I'm actually gonna make these in the spring. And it may be a different color, it may have different artwork on it, but this silhouette or this particular style, I'm going to make to sell, because I just get way too many compliments, which is, it's fun. It's really nice. I mean, it's a great thing to have, is when someone likes the design and you get so much feedback on it that, I could probably make these and people would like them. So I'm going to make this dress coming up in the future, but it does have, again, the sun circle design that represents our community, our world. Agricultural people in the Southeast, the sun was so important to us. And beyond that, beyond it representing the creator, our world, our ceremonial grounds. It's just beautiful on top of that. I really like looking at the sun symbol. Honestly, when I was younger, I used to look at it and go, wow, I was just mesmerized by it, just to stare at it before I ever even understood the meaning behind it. It's something that's really close to me, and I put it on a lot of my artwork. Never get tired of looking at it. Maybe everybody else does, but I don't. If you go by my booth and look at the clothes, you'll see it like everywhere you look. So it's one of my favorite motifs to use. But this dress I will have for sale in the springtime. Yes, do you have?
In Muscogee Nation now?
I do. I live on the reservation. I live just almost at the west boundary. I live in Holdenville, Oklahoma, which is like 5 miles from the border of the reservation. So I do live, and it's my husband's land, not my, like I said, I grew up in the Bay Area. I grew up in an urban area around California, or around San Francisco. My mother was one of those people that got taken away from her family when she was young and went to boarding school all the way through, not just high school, but then she was put in, I guess, the equivalent of vocational school now. I can't talk, vocational school. She said it was called commercial school. And 2 years of like secretarial classes. And then she got to choose a city to move to. And she said they told her she could go to Denver, she could go to Chicago, she could go to New York, she could go to Dallas, she could go to Los Angeles, and she chose San Francisco. So that's where my mother went. And so I was born and raised out in the Bay Area. Moved back to Oklahoma about the time I was 18. And now I say I've been here long enough that I have an accent, because I felt like I didn't have one when I moved here. But the longer I'm here, the worse it gets. So, and my husband is the one who's from Holdenville, actually. So it's his family's property that we live on. My husband has a really heavy accent, and so I think mine gets worse by the day, but I don't mind. Just when I go to California, they look at me like, what did you say? Yeah, and because it's leather, I don't know that you could launder it. Someone was asking me, yeah, and I think that you could dry clean this garment leather, but it's along the lines of the way you would treat like maybe leather chaps or a leather jacket, the same kind of care. Either spot clean it or very carefully have it professionally cleaned. No, you don't. And I wish I could show you, but it's got a lining so you can't see. But when you sew like one section to another section, you turn it inside out to do that. And so on the inside, it creates like a tube or a tunnel where those two pieces are connected. And so there are like some tubes that crisscross in here where I've attached two pieces of fabric. And before it's lined, if you try to get in it, it's like spider webs in there. You've got to stretch away, and you can choose, do I want to put all that in the front, which moves most of the volume to the front, or do I want to put it all behind me?
Does it make it a little heavy? It doesn't look heavy.
It's not really that heavy, and probably because half of it's cotton. If it was all leather, I think it would be heavier. And if it was all cotton, I think it would be lighter, but it's not really, I don't think you'd be, too heavy to wear, because again, it is garment leather. It's super, super thin. You're welcome to come up and feel it afterwards. Yeah, the leather is a little bit stiffer, and the cotton, yeah, I think the cotton is about just right, but you wouldn't want something like a polyester that's really soft and drapey because it would just all hang straight down. It wouldn't have that volume to it. So, fun things I like to talk about, draping and volume and the hand of fabric and things like that, but getting off subject, so. How many of you sew out there? Oh, fabulous. Some sewers. Very good. That's awesome. 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 Let me see. What else did I want to tell you about Native fashion? Does anybody else have any thoughts or comments? Yes.
Kind of halfway answer because you said you do a lot of commission, but where's your work available?
My work is available through my website. I have a website. It's ladeerapparel.com. That's a big old mouthful. I tried to buy the website lesliedeer.com, and when I went to see if it was available, I was like, oh yeah, good, it's available. And like I came back 2 weeks later, and of course someone bought it. You know how those people like stock that stuff out, see what people search, and then they buy it out from under you. So then it wasn't available. And so I had to come up with another name. And I was like, what else am I going to use for a name? And another thing that's interesting that I always remembered was in school, they told us not to name your company with your real name. They said, because if you ever sell your company, you sell the rights to your name. So you're limited on what you can do with your name sometimes. So then I remembered that as well. And I was like, well, okay, let me come up with something. So I just said, what about my initials? Which my name is Leslie Ann Deer. So the LA is just my first and middle initial. And then there's the Deer, which is spelled D-E-E-R. There's no E on the end. I know there's a lot with the E on the end. So I just say I'm the Bambi deer, not the tractor deer. But it's LA Deer. And then I put the apparel because I just felt like it's just too nondescript if you just say ladeer.com. What is that? So I threw the apparel, which becomes a big mouthful, but that's my website anyway. It's ladeerapparel.com is where you can purchase my clothes. I try not to overproduce. Like I don't want to make 5 dozen of this dress or 5 dozen of that dress and just make it an array of sizes and have it sitting around. That's convenient when you put something on your website and people want to buy it and they want it right now. But when all the excitement's over, if you're left with 6 of one size and 5 of another size, then what do you do with them? And so I decided to start taking orders for things instead of just producing them and having them ready to go. So what I would do is make a sample for a garment, photograph it with a model, and then put it on my website and say, here it is. Here's the sizes I can make. Purchase your size, and then I'm going to take orders for 2 weeks, and then I'll end the orders, and then I can calculate exactly how much fabric I need to fulfill all the orders. I have only made the sizes that I know somebody wants. And when it's all done and I have ordered the fabric, fulfilled all the orders, there's no waste. I have no extra garments. I have no extra fabric sitting around. That's another way that I try to be mindful of what I'm doing and not creating waste as I go along the way. I do try to, and I think that as Indigenous people, we all kind of think that way. We try to look for ways that are not wasteful. We try to use natural resources, things that are indigenous to our personal areas or our tribes, and things that we incorporate in what we do. But I try not to create more waste in the environment.
I'm interested in the applique process.
Oh, the applique? Yes. The Sac and Fox elders that taught me, the women that taught me, there were 3 of them. One of them her name was Adeline Du Bois, and she was a relative of my stepfather, who's Kickapoo. She was Kickapoo and Potawatomi. She did applique, and she showed me some of her techniques for doing it. But there were also 2 Sac and Fox women, Sarah Franklin and Viola Spoon, who taught me applique, and this was probably back in the early 1990s. And they were elders then. They were probably like in their 70s. So you can imagine they were born like in, 1920s or 30s maybe. And they used to tell me that when they were children, they learned to applique by hand with the needle and thread. And they made these little like cross stitches around the edge of their designs. They showed me how they cut them out and how they come up with their designs. And a lot of it was, inspired by their environment. Woodland tribes, they were inspired by all of the nature and everything around them. And they have a lot of curvilinear lines and a lot of, leaf and floral looking designs, a lot of botanical things. And they would cut those out, and then they would stitch it by hand. And they told me it would take hours and hours and hours and months and weeks to make maybe even just one strip of that ribbon work to put on a skirt or something, but they made their own clothes like that when they were young. And they said, and then when sewing machines came along, we had access to sewing machines. They said it just like changed everything. And even then they used like treadle machines, but that was so much faster to them. And so they showed me the process of doing that. And again, like I was saying, we're always adapting and using new technology. There is something called fusible web if you sew, you know, Wonder Under and those kind of products that you fuse onto the wrong side of your fabric. And you can either trace your designs onto the fusible web paper before you apply it to your fabric, or you can apply the fusible web to your fabric and then draw the designs. Then you cut them out and then apply them onto what it does is it holds your artwork in place while you sew it down. That's what they taught me to use. They showed me how to do it by hand. And me being younger back then, I was like, okay, yeah, thanks, no. I mean, I was like, that's really amazing that you did that, but I don't want to try it. So they did, you know, show me how to do it with a sewing machine too. And it's basically a zigzag stitch, or also known as a satin stitch in sewing. Everyone, again, has their own idea of how to do that. I see a lot of applique that has like a solid outline, like a full thread line around it, just such tight zigzag stitching that it makes a solid line around your design. And it's just funny. It just so happened that the machine I had at home, it was an old Singer machine. And I could not do a tight zigzag stitch with my machine. When I would set it all the way down to 0, the thread would break or it would skip stitches. And so I said, okay, this machine just doesn't want to sew that tight. And so I had to just kind of adapt and use a stitch that's not quite as tight or as close. And I got so used to doing that years later when I got another machine, I didn't even like the tight stitching anymore. I didn't even want to try it. I wasn't interested. And I just keep the same stitch that is not a really tight stitch. It's not a wide stitch either, but it's not real close together. So that's just something that I do in my applique. I know a lot of people like tighter stitches or really close stitching, but I don't use that in mine just because over time I got used to the machine I had, which wouldn't do that. So it's funny how we just adapt to things and just work with it and just move on. And so that's how I do my applique, is I just draw the designs on the fusible web, apply it to the fabric, apply it to the background, and then sew it down. Sometimes do you use a stabilizer? Have you tried applique? You can put a stabilizer, like an interfacing or something behind it, especially if you're using a real fine fabric, something that's delicate, like this wool is really thin. It's a lightweight wool. And if you're zigzagging too close, it can draw it up or make it pucker. And so you can put a stabilizer behind it to keep that from happening. It takes a little practice. Yes.
Do you ever use stencils?
You know, I have not tried using stencils. I do make templates sometimes for designs. And the way that I was taught to make the designs, we used to cut them out of paper bags to make their symmetrical sack and box designs. And so I used to use paper bags, and then I advanced to manila folders. Draw my design on a manila folder and cut it out so I could use it over and over again. And that's about as high-tech as I am, really. I know there's equipment today that you can buy, equipment for home sewers and things like, Cricut, I think, Cricut machines and different kinds of things that will cut dies, cut the same pattern over and over again. But I was excited when I first learned about that, and someone did a demo with the Cricut machine for me. And once the blade cut out the little design and we tried to peel it off that sticky mat, it just frayed all around the edges and almost came apart. So it's like, I was like, no, that's enough of that. I'll stick with what I have. So there's some things, you know, you can try and maybe you don't want to adapt those. So I still do some things the old school way. When I do beadwork, I learned how to do beadwork on canvas backed with brown paper bag. And that's pretty much how I still do beadwork. I know there are lots of, again, fusible stabilizers. And someone asked me the other day, they were like, hey, do you have any Pellon? And I was like, Pellon for what? And they're like, to bead on. And I said, oh, I don't, you mean like stabilizer? I don't bead on stabilizer. I don't even know what they're talking about. I'm kind of old school like that. Some things, if they work and I've used them several times and I'm comfortable with it, I just stick with that. If I don't see the advantage of, you know, it saving me a lot of time or something, then I don't even bother with it. But did that answer your question about applique? All right, well, I want to ask you all, how about this? I want to know what you all think about this dress. because it's so new to me, and I absolutely love it. I've been asking everybody that comes to my booth, I'm like, what do you think of this dress? And some people like it, and some people are like, well, it's different. I use my husband as a gauge a lot. Like, he doesn't know anything. He could care less about clothes. If you ask him what fashion is, he'll be like, I don't know, just clothes. That'll probably be his answer. So I use him as a gauge sometimes. If I make something and he goes, oh, that's really pretty, then I'm like, okay, people are gonna like it. But then sometimes if he looks at it and he goes, yeah, it's okay, then I'm like, okay, it's not such a winner. So I asked him about this dress and he goes, well, I had to look at it for a while and then I was like, oh, okay, I get it. It's a dress. So that was interesting to hear from my husband, but I'm just curious to know what other people think about it. What do you think about this design? Anybody have any comment? And you won't hurt my feelings at all because I already love it and you're not going to change my mind. Do you really?
My eye went to it immediately when I walked in.
I think that's one thing about, like I didn't study art. I don't have an art degree, so I don't even know all the art terminology sometimes, but I feel like, and I think it was Diana Vreeland that said that where the eye has to travel, where's your eye going? What's your eye looking at? And I think this is one of those things that gives your eye plenty to look at. It's like, oh, look here, look there, look at this, look at that. And I think that's what's fun about this dress.
I think it's fun on a mannequin, but I cannot imagine wearing it.
Yeah, well, I think, now that I have a lining in it, I think that it's pretty comfortable. It just slips right on over your head. Your arms go through. There's no zippers. There's no hooks. There's no nothing. It just slips on. It's got a lining in it. It would hang loose on you. And yeah, maybe for sitting down. I hadn't thought about sitting down, but I think for walking around in it, I think it would be kind of fun. I might wish it had a pocket, but there are so many different crevices and things in here that you could find a pocket to put your things in if you wanted to. This one goes all the way through to the other side, but it's like a tube right there, a little tunnel. Just endlessly fascinating to me to look at it because you can change it around and move around and it'll be completely different. But I'm fascinated with it. And I said, well, people just aren't used to seeing something like this. Maybe in a big urban city or something, maybe Los Angeles or New York, they'd be like, oh yeah, another dress, big deal. But in Oklahoma, they're like, what is that? So I said, I'm just gonna keep making them until people get used to seeing them. They'll be like, oh, there's another one of those dresses. But I just finished this one. And so I'm going to put it on a model and get some photographs of it. And then we'll see how it looks on a real human. Because I know it does make a difference looking at it on a dress form versus a human where it's got movement and motion and life to it. So definitely gonna try that out and then see what I think of it, then evaluate them. But I want to try this some more because I really enjoyed the process and I'm fascinated with the finished look of it.
Did you have trouble deciding on the secondary fabric, the top fabric?
I did, I really did because, well, I like bright colors. So it had to be, I wanted something that kind of wouldn't overpower the sun circles, but would complement them. Then color-wise, it needed to be something that would kind of go with it as well. But then I was really drawn to this right away because I love floral and I love the bright colors. So when I saw that, I was like, that's the one I need. The other artist is here? Oh, very good. Well, the other artist is here. Thank you for sticking around to the very end and listening to me motor mouth.